Chapter 18 of Hunting for Hidden Gold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Blizzard. The Hardy Boys set off down the trail at a good pace. The wind howled down from the crags and whistled through the trees. The entire mountain was veiled in a great mist of swirling snow, and as the wind rose, the snow stung their faces and slashed against them. "Storm coming up," said Frank, burying his chin deeper into his coat collar. "I hope it doesn't get any worse. We'll never find the place. We won't give up now. If we wait until tomorrow, it may be too late." The storm grew rapidly worse. The snowfall was so heavy that it obscured even the tops of the great masses of rock, and it quickly drifted over the trail so that the boys were forced to follow the path by memory. This was difficult, as in some places the trail had wound about through tumbled masses of boulders, and when it was hidden by the snow, they had to guess at its intricate windings. Several times Frank lost it altogether, but he was always able to pick up the trail again in some place that was sheltered from the storm. The boys struggled on in silence. The wind was increasing in volume, and the snow was so heavy that Joe could scarcely see the dim form of his brother but a few yards ahead. Suddenly he saw his brother stop. "I've lost the trail!" shouted Frank, turning back. They were standing ankle-deep in snow. There was not the slightest vestige of a path. High above them they could discern the gloomy mass of a steep rock cliff, and before them loomed a sloping declivity of rock that afforded not the slightest foothold. "I lost the trail farther back, but I thought I was following it all right and could pick it up farther on. We'll have to turn back." They retraced their steps. So furiously was it snowing that their own footprints were almost obliterated, and they could scarcely find their way back to the place where they had left the trail. They found it again, however, and struck out in another direction. It was growing bitterly cold, and although they were warmly clad, they began to feel the effect of the chill wind that swept down from the icy mountain slopes. They pulled their caps down about their ears and made their way slowly forward against the terrific wind that buffeted them and flung sheets of snow against them. Frank gave a shout of triumph when he finally picked up the trail again in the shelter of some huge rocks where the snow had not yet penetrated. They advanced with new courage. At length they emerged through the defile where the trail to the outlaws' deserted camp led off the main trail up the mountain, and then they rested. Far below them they could see the slope of the mountain, veiled in sweeping banners of snow that shifted and swirled madly in the blustering wind. The town was hidden from view, obscured by the white blizzard. "Do you think we should try to make it?" asked Frank. "The mine?" "Yes. You're leading this procession, whatever you want to do. If you think the storm is too bad, we'll start for the cabin. What would you rather do?" "I hate to give up now," replied Frank after a moment of hesitation. "I feel the same way about it," Joe said. "I vote we try to find the mine. Once we get there, we'll be able to get out of the storm anyway." "I thought you'd say that," laughed Frank. "We'll head for the Lone Tree Mine then. As far as I can remember, it is just below us, and then over to the right. We'll find it, I guess." They started down the slope, but once they left the shelter of the rocks where they had rested, they found that the fury of the storm was increased tenfold on the mountainside. The full force of the blizzard struck them. The wind shrieked with 1,000 voices. The snow came sweeping down on them as though lashed by invisible whips. The roar of the storm sounded in their ears, and the fine snow almost blinded them. "It's worse than I thought," muttered Frank. The slope was steep and precipitous. They could not distinguish the details of the trail other than as a vaguely winding path that led steadily downward. Frank lost his footing on a slippery rock and went tumbling down the declivity for several yards before he came to a stop in a snowbank. He got to his feet slowly and limped on, suffering from a bruised ankle. The trail wound about a steep cliff, and he skirted the base of it, then disappeared between two high masses of rock. Joe could dimly see the figure of his brother, and he hastened on so as not to lose sight of him. But when Joe came around the rocks, he was confronted by an opaque cloud of snow, like a huge white screen that had dropped from the skies. He could not see Frank at all. He followed the trail as well as he could, but in a few moments he came to a stop. He was out on the open mountainside, and the winds at this point converged, so that the snow seemed to be swirling about him from all sides. The faint trail had been wholly obliterated. He shouted, "Frank! Frank!" But the wind flung the words back into his teeth. A feeling of panic seized him for a moment, but he quickly calmed himself, for he realized that when Frank looked behind and saw they were separated, he would retrace his steps. He went on uncertainly a few paces, until it occurred to him that he might be wandering in the wrong direction, and that if Frank did turn back, he might not be able to find him. So he tried to return to the trail again, but the snow was falling so heavily by now that he seemed to be wandering in an enormous gray void, from which all direction had been erased. He was hopelessly lost, so he stood where he was and shouted again and again. There was no answer. He could only hear the constant howling of the wind, the sweep and swish of snow. Once he thought he heard a faint cry from far ahead, but he could not be sure, and although he listened intently, he could hear it no more. As he stood there on the rocks with the snow sweeping down on him, and with the wind howling about him, with only the gaunt, gloomy shapes of the boulders looming out of the heavy mist of snow, Joe felt the icy clutch of the cold, and he began to beat his arms against his chest so as to keep warm. He knew the danger of inaction in such a blizzard. Anything was better than remaining where he was. He struggled forward, slipped and fell on the rocks, regained his feet, and moved slowly on into the teeth of the wind. He did not know whether he was following the trail or not, but, to the best of his judgment, he tried to descend the slope. As for Frank, he had been plunging doggedly on through the snow, confident that Joe was close behind, and it was not until he had gone far down the trail that he became aware that his brother was not following. He turned, and when he could no longer discern the figure in the storm behind, he retraced his steps, shouting at the top of his lungs. There was no answer. He searched about, going to left and right of the trail. He did not dare go far, being fearful of losing the trail himself. Frank was alarmed lest Joe had slipped and fallen on the rocks and injured himself. If he were unable to proceed, he would freeze to death, lying helpless on the mountainside. With this thought in his mind, he searched frantically. He tried to follow back up the trail, but the snow had swept over his footsteps, and he soon found himself knee-deep in a heavy drift, and he knew he had lost the path. He tried to regain the trail, but the white screen of snow was like a shroud over the rocks, and he had lost all sense of direction. He floundered about in the snow aimlessly, but the trail constantly evaded him. Frank set his jaw grimly and went hither and thither, stopping every little while to shout. He knew that the wind drowned out his voice, and he realized the futility of his cries, but still he hoped that there was just a chance that Joe might hear him. Frank Hardy felt an overpowering sense of loneliness as he wandered about among the rocks and the deep drifts. He seemed to be alone in a world of swirling, shrieking winds and flailing snow that stormed down from a sky of leaden hue. He shouted again and again, but to no avail. It was mid-afternoon, but the sky was so dark that it seemed almost dusk. If darkness fell and they were lost out on the mountain, there was little hope that they would survive until morning. They would perish from exposure. "I'd better go back to Hank Shale's place and get a searching party to come up and look for Joe," he thought. This seemed the only sensible solution, but when he turned and tried to find the trail down the mountain again, he found that it eluded him. There was not the vestige of a trail, not the sign of a path. "And I'm lost too," he muttered. The wind shrieked down from the rocks. The snow swirled furiously about him. The blizzard raged. The roaring of the storm drummed in his ears as he stumbled and floundered about among the rocks and snow. The Hardy Boys were lost, separated in the storm. End of chapter 18.